In 1770, an Austrian inventor toured Europe with a mechanical wooden man that could play chess. It sat at a cabinet, reacted to its opponents, and routinely beat royalty. But the cabinet was a decoy. It was designed to hide a human chess master sitting in the dark, pulling the levers to simulate a thinking machine. For 24 years, SpaceX operated with that same level of opacity. As a private company, it functioned as a tightly sealed box. Elon Musk curated the public's perception, releasing high-definition feeds of rocket landings and orbital tests while keeping the internal ledgers hidden. Without an open stock market to verify the company's worth, SpaceX used a closed-door mechanism called a tender offer to establish its value. Every few months, the company allowed a small group of early investors to sell tiny fractions of their shares to hand-picked buyers. These charts show how those isolated, private transactions dictated the value of the entire corporation. By multiplying the price of those hand-picked shares across the whole company, backroom deals in early 2026 pushed SpaceX's valuation to $1.8 trillion. This valuation was never tested by the broader market. It relied on a closed loop of private buyers agreeing on a price, effectively creating a self-reinforcing financial loop. On May 20, 2026, that loop was broken. SpaceX filed its S-1 paperwork to go public, legally requiring the company to open its books to federal regulators and the general public for the first time. The filing reveals an immediate financial pivot. SpaceX went from a $791 million profit one year to a massive multi-billion-dollar net loss the next. These losses did not stem from mission failures or launch delays. The rockets were flying and the satellite network was expanding, which suggests the capital was being diverted elsewhere. This creates a disconnect between the $1.8 trillion price tag and the internal reality of a company currently operating with a massive cash deficit. The S-1 filing separates the organization into three distinct corporate entities operating within a single structure, each with a different financial role. First is Starlink. This orbital internet network generated $11.4 billion in 2025, accounting for 61% of total revenue. It options as the primary source of profit for the entire company. Next is the Rocket division. Despite its high profile, this wing operated at a $657 million loss, driven by the intense research and development costs required to build the new Starship fleet. This loss serves a specific strategy. The Rocket division absorbs the launch costs, allowing Starlink to deploy its satellites at a fraction of the cost paid by competitors. Based strictly on these two divisions, the company would exist as a profitable monopoly with a self-sustaining launch and network cycle. The third entity is xAI. This artificial intelligence wing was integrated into the broader corporate structure in February 2026. The waterfall chart shows the impact. A $6.3 billion loss from xAI effectively wiped out all the profit generated by the Starlink network. This burn rate is accelerating. In the first 3 months of 2026 alone, the AI division lost $2.5 billion, meaning a single quarter's losses now nearly equal a full year's worth of previous spending. The data shows xAI is now consuming 75% of the entire company's infrastructure budget. Specifically, $7.7 billion out of a $10 billion total was spent on AI-related assets in a single quarter. Investors participating in the IPO are providing the capital required to sustain a high-burn AI startup, which is currently consuming the majority of the resources generated by the space operations. This raises the question of why a profitable space monopoly would pivot so aggressively toward a cash-heavy AI venture. The answer lies in the constraints of Earth's infrastructure. Global power grids are struggling to keep up with the electricity and cooling demands of massive AI data centers. Musk's plan involves moving that hardware into orbit. In space, servers can access constant solar energy and use the natural cold of the vacuum for cooling, bypassing terrestrial limits on energy in space. This strategy suggests that the long-term success of AI may depend on physically removing the processing hardware from the constraints of Earth's power grid. An FCC filing outlines SpaceX's intent to launch up to 1 million satellites, creating a massive orbital shell dedicated to data processing. Other major players are pursuing the same goal. Google is developing Project Suncatcher, signaling a shift in the corporate space race from communications to orbital computing. Musk has publicly stated that orbital AI will reach cost parity within 2 years, but the official SEC filing presents a different assessment. In the S-1 paperwork, SpaceX warns that the technology for orbital computing is unproven and carries no guarantee of commercial viability. The $1.8 trillion valuation is the price for a stake in a technology that the company's own legal filing admits may never actually work. SpaceX now operates as a foundational piece of global infrastructure, transcending the typical definition of a Silicon Valley tech company. To understand the sheer scale, look at this planetary map showing active satellites currently in orbit. Out of all the operational hardware surrounding Earth, roughly 10,000 of them, 2/3 of the entire global grid, belong exclusively to the Starlink network. We are living in a reality where a massive, planet-encompassing communication network is governed entirely by the decisions of one individual. Right now, the dominant public narrative is that SpaceX is gearing up for a highly anticipated $1.8 trillion initial public offering. The pitch is that this flood of capital is needed to fund humanity's ultimate expansion, building a permanent settlement on Mars. But when you look closely at the corporate ledgers, that interplanetary ambition starts to look like a distraction. The push to take SpaceX public is actually driven by a harsh, immediate financial deadline. The real catalyst forcing Musk toward the stock market is a $20 billion bridge loan. If you look at this financial flowchart, you can trace exactly where that obligation came from. When Musk purchased Twitter, he borrowed $12.5 billion. Later, his artificial intelligence startup, xAI, took on another $5 billion in loans to build data centers. For a while, those combined loans carried a brutal 12.5% interest rate. That meant roughly $1.8 billion was bleeding out every single year just to cover the interest, without even touching the principal. To stop the bleeding, a corporate restructuring took place. The debt blocks were shifted off the books of Twitter and xAI and legally transferred over to SpaceX. Because SpaceX has reliable revenues, the banks agreed to drop the interest rate down to 4.6%. But that restructuring came with a strict legal trap buried in the contract. A bridge loan is temporary. If SpaceX goes public, the company is obligated to take the cash raised from the IPO and hand it directly to those specific banks. This IPO functions as a legally mandated bailout mechanism designed to clear out old private debts using new investor capital. Since SpaceX handles highly sensitive military launches and satellite networks for the Pentagon, the logical question is why Musk wouldn't just let the federal government step in and resolve the liquidity crisis. The answer lies in how federal rescues actually operate. When the state intervenes to save a critical institution, it protects the corporate entity, but it almost always removes the founding leadership from power. We saw this exact scenario play out during the 2008 financial crisis. The massive institutions survived, but the executives who built those portfolios were systematically stripped of their authority. The government kept the insurance giant AIG alive because it was too deeply embedded in the economy to fail, but it completely gutted the internal administration. For Musk, the true nightmare is not bankruptcy. His absolute greatest fear is losing sole, autocratic control over the empire he built. This creates a very specific structural dilemma. He requires billions of dollars from retail investors to satisfy the bank loans, but he outright refuses to give those incoming investors any actual voice in how the company is run. He plans to solve this through a dual-class share structure. Ordinary investors receive standard stock, where 1 share equals 1 vote. Musk holds a special class, granting him 10 votes per share. So while officially owning 42% of the company, this multiplier means he legally dictates 85% of the voting power. The SEC filings take it a step further. Buried in the official paperwork is a condition stating that anyone who buys a share must permanently waive their right to sue the company in regular courts or participate in class action lawsuits. Wall Street is being presented with a highly unusual proposition. Retail investors are being asked to funnel billions into paying off old debts in exchange for exactly zero operational leverage or legal recourse. You have to ask why any rational investor on Wall Street would agree to sign away their voting power and legal rights just to buy into a heavily indebted corporation. The answer is leverage. They are willing to accept these dictatorial terms because SpaceX offers something no other stock does: direct access to an unregulated geopolitical superpower. In 2022, during the height of the conflict in Ukraine, Musk made a unilateral, personal decision to restrict Starlink coverage over specific regions. With a single command, the communications network for an entire sovereign military was blinded, altering their capability on the battlefield. That power is now being woven directly into the core of American national defense. SpaceX is positioning itself to secure massive government contracts, including critical infrastructure for the highly anticipated Golden Dome missile tracking system. Traditional investment rules fall away here. Every share represents a stake in a privately operated nation-state. Musk's personal financial motivation is visible in the fine print. On paper, his official annual salary from SpaceX is just $54,000, but the board has approved a staggering compensation package of 1 billion shares. The bulk of that payout triggers only if he hits two monumental milestones, pushing the company's valuation to $7.5 trillion and establishing a permanent human colony on Mars of at least 1 million people. This comparison chart illustrates the massive gap between objective reality and those personal ambitions. Financial analysts at Morningstar currently value SpaceX at roughly $780 billion, yet Musk is aggressively pushing the market to accept a $1.8 trillion valuation for the IPO. The discrepancy comes down to what is actually being sold. Morningstar is calculating the worth of the internet network and the rockets that are launching from the pad today. Musk, however, is asking the public to pre-fund a capital for an interplanetary civilization that exists only in his blueprints. So when the opening bell finally rings, the market will have to make a choice. Are investors truly buying into the next evolutionary leap in human technology? Or are they simply paying the ransom on a billionaire's past mistakes, just for the privilege of standing in the shadow of his total monopoly?